and we will have completed the book. Actually, I will tell you a secret. I never premeditated this series at all. I was just going to preach a sermon on Daniel chapter 1, and the whole thing is kind of snowballed from there. And so, but I've enjoyed it. It's been good. It's been thought-provoking. It's caused me to have to do a lot of study. And I appreciate your comments on the series. We've had a lot of people that are viewing the series on YouTube that have benefited from it. I think the sermon on the 70 weeks has got about 50 views on it last time I checked. So I'm very thankful that it's been helpful to people. Now, the sermon today is a little bit unusual because we're going to go through what I think is the most detailed prophecy in all of the Bible. Daniel chapter 11. I call this history in advance. I used to say our newspapers, but now I don't read newspapers much anymore, but I might say our news apps because we do read those. Our news apps will tell us what happened in the previous 24 hours and in complete detail. And many people don't believe that the future can be known in the same detail as the past. You know, there are skeptics that reject the book of Daniel. They claim, well, no one could possibly have known in such detail these coming events. And so rejecting predictive prophecy, they've decided that Daniel must have been written after the events had already happened. And they pretend to be a prophecy as a way to encourage the Jews. Well, if a person does not believe that the Bible is from God, then they're going to have a difficult time with Daniel chapter 11. Skeptics just don't know what to do with the evidence that Daniel was written long ago, because it puts a stamp of inspiration upon God's holy word. God, for whom time does not exist, knows everything at once. In Isaiah 46 and verse 10, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not done, say, my counsel shall stand, and I shall do all my pleasure. Detail is not a problem for God. Here you have a chapter that was written probably around 536 BC. And it tells of events that happened between then and 166 BC. And God reveals to Daniel a summary of what was going to happen to his people when they were restored as a nation. They were not going to have an easy time of it. This chapter describes wars and armies from the north and from the south, in Persia and Greece. And the words forces and army and anger and intrigue all describe the course of history. Of course, things haven't changed much in the world, have they? In Daniel chapter 11, you will find a variety of predictions. I don't have the time to cover all of them today. I can just summarize them as best I can. But I have included this chart in the bulletin, on the back of the bulletin. And it will show you the many prophecies in this chapter and their fulfillment. And as we sort of walk through these predictions, you're going to see how detailed and how accurate they are. And I've chosen to outline them historically around 4 kings whose names all start with the letter A is the best way to outline this. First of all, there is Ahasuerus. All right, in Daniel chapter 11 and verse 1. Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So the angel's first comments are about the kings of Persia. He says there would be 3 Persian kings to stand up after Cyrus, and then there would be a 4th, and he would be the richest of them all. We know from history that the 3 kings that followed Cyrus were Cambyses, Pseudo-Smyrtus, who was an impostor, and Darius the First. And Darius the First helped the Jews in rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. The 4th king in this prophecy, who was far richer than them all, and would stir up all against Greece, was Ahasuerus. That's the king of the book of Esther, also called Xerxes by a lot of commentators. He was the 4th great Persian king, and you had this conflict with Greece. He was determined to conquer Greece, as his father had failed to do so. And he assembled a large army, one of the largest armies in ancient history. And he invaded Greece, and he won great victories, but he suffered a great naval defeat when his larger ships were rammed and sunk by the more maneuverable and smaller ships from Greece in the Battle of Salamis. And so following this loss, Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, returns to Persia, and he holds a beauty contest, and you know the winner. The winner was Esther. So first of all, you have Ahasuerus. And then the second king, whose name begins with A, was Alexander. He's the second king that comes on the scene about 150 years later. In Daniel 11 and verse 3, and a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And that fits Alexander the Great perfectly. He was one of the most remarkable men of history, conquered the world from Europe all the way to India by the time he was 33. Verse 4, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. So when Alexander arose at the height of his career, his kingdom was taken away from him and divided. He died, and he left a mentally handicapped brother, left an illegitimate son, and a pregnant wife as his posterity. And tragically, all of them were murdered within a matter of months, leaving no posterity. So his great empire was divided among his 4 generals, divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, he said. General Cassander took Macedonia. General Lamasacus took Thrace and Asia Minor. General Ptolemy took Egypt, and General Seleucus I took Syria. And most of the rest of the prophecy has to do with the tug of war between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids that carried on for the next 100 years or so. Ptolemy became the king of Egypt to the south of Palestine. Seleucus became the king of Syria, which was to the north of Palestine. And the prophecy tells how these 2 nations would march all over Israel, and it would be between these 2 great warring nations. And God's telling Daniel there's going to be tough years ahead. In Daniel 11, verses 5 through 20, details the history of almost 200 years of fighting between the armies of the north and the armies of the south. Verse 6, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up. And they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. History says an arranged marriage took place in order to achieve peace. Through marriage to his daughter Bernice, Ptolemy II offered an alliance to Seleucid's grandson Antiochus. To marry her, Antiochus II had to divorce his wife because he already had one. He divorced his wife Laodice, and the scorned Laodice poisoned the new bride along with all the attendants that brought her. She then lured Antiochus to remarry her. And then after the wedding, she poisoned him too. Woman scorned. And put her son, Seleucus II, on the throne. So, verse 6 happens just as God said it would. Verse 7, but out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall dwell against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt, their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold. He shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. So these verses precede the rest of the story. Bernice's brother avenges her death by attacking Seleucus I, the king of the north. He kills Laodice, goes back to Egypt with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and of gold. Later, Seleucus I in the north tries to retaliate, but he fails. He enters the realm of the king of the south, but he goes back to his own land. First you have Ahasuerus. Next you have Alexander. Then you have the third king whose name begins with A, and that's Antiochus III, or Antiochus the Great. And the prophecies in verses 10 through 19 focus on one of Seleucid II's sons, Antiochus III, who amassed a vast army and went down to Egypt and drove the Ptolemies all the way out of Palestine toward Egypt. And he was joined by many Jews, and they thought, oh, he's our hero. He's our champion. But he wasn't the Savior for which Israel had hoped. He spent most of his time plundering Palestine, but he couldn't defeat Egypt. And according to the prophecy, he would do as he pleased, just like Alexander the Great. Verse 16, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will. And none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So verses 17 to 19 predict Antiochus III's failed attempts to conquer the world. Hoping to establish peace with Egypt, he gave Ptolemy V his daughter. You may have heard of her. In fact, I saw something about her in the news just last week about her tomb. This is Cleopatra. Cleopatra the First. Cleopatra fell in love and turned against her own father. And then he launched an invasion into Asia Minor and Greece, but he was pushed back by Rome's iron legions and forced to pay heavy tribute. And when attacking the temple of Jupiter in hopes of stealing its treasures, his own people rose up and murdered him. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. His body was never found. Now, that's interesting. I want you to look at verse 19, because his epitaph in verse 19 sums up his life's disappointing end. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. His body not being found was predicted by God. The Romans took control of Syria and taxing them because they'd caused so many problems. In verse 20, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Succeeding Antiochus III was his first son, Seleucus IV, who inherited an empty treasury and heavy debt to Rome. And so to raise money, he sent his prime minister to raise taxes and seize the temple funds. The king was later murdered by his power-hungry prime minister. And such was predicted by God years before, this raiser of taxes. Within a few days he would be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. So first you have Ahasuerus, next you have Alexander, third you have Antiochus III, and now fourth you come to Antiochus IV. And we call him Antiochus Epiphanes. I'll explain that in just a minute. In verse 21, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. The dead king's brother stole the throne from his nephew. We know this usurper as the little horn that we talked about back in Daniel 8, 9 through 13. In verse 22, and with the arms of a flood shall they be overthrown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. This is talking about he removed the highly respected high priest, Onias II, called here the prince of the covenant. Verse 23, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. So with deceptive promises, he lured the king of Egypt into an alliance, made a league with him, Daniel would say, and accomplished what his fathers never did. He redistributed the wealth. He won widespread support among the lower classes. And when he became strong, he invaded Egypt. And he defeated Ptolemy. And after the battle, the two kings feasted together, toasting and making deals. But both were deceitful. Verse 27, both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Antiochus IV failed to take control of Egypt. Frustrated, he went back home to his own land. But on the way, like so many of them did, they'd take out their aggression on the Jews as they went back home, as they went back through Palestine. Verse 28, then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and shall return to his own land. So he wreaked havoc in temple affairs, set up his own pawn as high priest, and cruelly crushed a minor rebellion. 2 years later, he goes down to Egypt and tries to conquer them again. However, Roman ships of Kittim, or Cyprus, met him in the Egyptian harbor, and a Roman official warned him to withdraw or else. That's verse 30. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved, and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So he goes down to Egypt, and he's humiliated. He does about face, returns to Palestine, and like they always do, took out his anger on the Jews once more, this time slaughtered thousands, outlawed Judaism, converted the temple into a pagan shrine. Look at verse 31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. He goes into Jerusalem, he slaughters women and children, he takes the god of Zeus into the Jewish temple, he stops all the Jewish sacrifices, he tries to make the Jews bow to Zeus, and then he takes a pig, kills it on the altar, flung its blood all throughout the temple, force-fed the pork to the priest, and then offered the pig as a sacrifice on the altar. The temple was desolate. It was unclean. No one could go there. Antiochus Epiphanes had made it an abomination. Epiphanes means madman. That was Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, madman. That's the way that he acted. Verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. This was a dark period in Israel's history. Finally, a light of hope flickered with the Maccabean family, and they launched a revolt against Antiochus IV. The book of Maccabees tells the story of brave Jews who battled and rebelled against Antiochus and finally brought his reign to an end. Many courageous Jews lost their lives during the rebellion, verses 33 through 35, falling by sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil for many days. That's verse 33. And finally, in 166 BC, Judas Maccabeus cleansed the temple and restored worship in the temple once again. The last part of this chapter is so abused by the premillennialist who try to apply this to an antichrist at the end of time. Daniel 11 and verse 40 does mention the time of the end, but Scripture uses a phrase like time of the end to refer to the end of the time period under discussion, rather than pointing to the final end of time when Jesus returns. There are some good brethren who believe that these last verses introduces us to the Romans, who did appear in the last part of the Grecian kingdom. There are others who believe that Antiochus IV of Syria is still in view here, and I do. Look at verse 36. And the king shall do according to his will. And he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Well, what king? Well, it seems to me to be the one he's been discussing. Antiochus Epiphanes. Verses 36 through 39 speaks of his blasphemy. 36 through 37, he would magnify himself above every god. 38 through 40 would honor strange gods. Verses 40 through 43 speaks of his conquest. Egypt would attack, but he would respond with overwhelming force. Edom, Moab, Ammon would escape, but Egypt would not escape. And even the Libyans and the Ethiopians would submit. And then finally, verse 45, he would come to an end. I've just summarized that, but this chapter is, as I called it, history in advance. It's amazing. It's accurate. It's proof of the Bible's inspiration. And it helps to build up our faith today. God gave us Daniel chapter 11 to demonstrate to us in one little section of history that when he says something is going to happen, it's going to happen. Just exactly as God said it would. Men can only guess the future. God knows it's going to happen before it ever happens. Now, I want to conclude today by zooming in on that phrase I mentioned a moment ago from Daniel 11 and verse 32, which I believe has a specific application to the Maccabees, where he said, "But the people that do know their God shall be strong." And I think about the fact, haven't we also seen that demonstrated all throughout the book of Daniel? What sustained Daniel? What sustained his friends throughout this time? What helped them to conquer these pagan influences on them? It was their knowledge of God. Taught them at a young age that helped to sustain them. And Daniel could predict that by inspiration. And he could attest to it by his own experiences. In his own life, Daniel went through so much. He'd been through the fires of pain and persecution. And he would know what the knowledge of God could cause a man to do. All you have to do is retrace the first 9 chapters of the book of Daniel, and you can see clearly the evidence of that fact. The people who know their God are the strong ones. They are the ones that make the difference in life. And we ask you today, how well do you know God? If you've not obeyed him, you don't know him. You need to obey him today. Put your trust in Jesus. Turn from sin, confess him. Be baptized for the remission of sins, Acts 2 and 38. And that will put you into the church, the body of Christ. The Lord will add you to his church as he does daily those that are being saved. Acts 2 and verse 47. If you're here today and as a child of God, you're not living right, you wish to come repenting of sin, we'd love to pray with you and for you. While together we stand and sing. Won't you come?